Hello, and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most familiar work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back to talk about some more one after another chapters from one new perspective and one perspective we've already seen in this arc, which I thought would have invalidated the rules that we assumed this arc was going by, but maybe not.
It was funny because that chapter 10.d at the end of last week sort of ended with that moment with Lucy. So I was like, I guess it could be a Lucy perspective, but I didn't quite expect it. I guess I'm just riding this high from all these great interludes. I was hoping we get another wacky interlude.
Anyway, we get one interlude and one main character perspective chapter. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with the interlude. We're in Toadswallow's head. And I think this is the interlude we've all been excited for over the course of the entire story, so I'm glad we finally got into it. Definitely pays off pretty well.
Yeah. Well, and this is the 100th chapter too, so it's like a special 100th chapter celebration present from Wildbow. Is the point of view we've all been waiting for.
Yeah.
I think this chapter also hits 1,000,000 words, which is also exciting.
Couldn't have happened with a better perspective character. So yes, we're in Toadswallow's head, and we watch his birth. He is yanked from the mud, born to participate in baby goblin cockfights. Despite the odds being stacked against him, he emerges victorious.
Yep, and he gets his name because he wins this fight by tricking the other guy into eating shit. So, I know, because we learn in this chapter his actual name is Toadswallow.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we see
and
how he got that name. Yeah, it's good.
Well, ironically, he didn't earn it. Like, he didn't eat shit. The other guy did.
Well, yeah, true. So, maybe he should never have been called Toadswallow.
I don't know. I think that suits him perfectly. The being named after the time he tricked a guy into eating so much shit, he was able to beat him.
Yeah, especially because that was his big emergence into the world. It tracks.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this whole like born to fight thing that happens to all these goblins just feels so on point for all the stuff we've been seeing with like Pecker Snot and just goblins in general. With like how it feels like they're this real big commentary on like self-perpetuating toxic cultures. Like there's a baby here who doesn't want to fight, and so just promptly gets killed. And you can see like that sort of a statement on how like there's this sort of Darwinism to how violence can be perpetuated in like goblin culture.
Yeah, I like that. The comparison of it to this Darwinian idea makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's why goblins are the most violent, because they survive if they are the most violent. So, of course, they would be.
Yeah, and it's why I've been so excitedly following all this stuff with Peckersnot, because it seems like Verona is helping him escape it to some extent, like embracing his more artistic sides. And we're seeing in this interlude, like Toadswallow and a few of the others have got out being more than just shitty violence, but they're the exceptions more than the rule is kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I like that thought. I like the thought that Verona is breaking this cycle with Peckersnot. I think we can also see that Snowdrop and Cherry Pop's relationship, or even just Snowdrop's ties to the goblins in general, as well as, Toadswallow as a character, are all kind of similarly breaking that cycle. And I think that's very interesting, and obviously ties into things that are happening on the in the story.
Yeah. We'll definitely get to talk a lot more about all those points you just brought up for sure. But I think the other thing worth mentioning here is just this cool imagery. Like, so the line in the first paragraph sort of comes up is, "This waste is pulled so deep that it transcends time and nature. Here, things do not rot, but recycle through, collect, bubble up, and sink down." And I just love this as a sort of, I guess, another metaphor for how this world works, because that's sort of what can happen with ideas, right? Like, it's similar to what it seems to happen with things that get lost. It makes me wonder why things down here don't necessarily get lost. Maybe they do if they sink far enough.
I just kind of love how, everything in this world is spirits, right? It's spirits all the way down, and we kind of are seeing more examples of how uh, I'm almost picturing it as like a ring, and at the very outer edges of this ring, spirits are the least formed and are just like pure concepts. And then as they come into the world, they get pulled into the center of this ring. They are more and more tangible. And
Yeah,
giving birth to a goblin is literally reaching for a gross idea and pulling it out of that intangibility and into the tangible world. I just think that's brilliant. I love it. Um, it
yeah.
it actually, because I'm interested if we've heard origin stories for other types of other, especially given what Toad talks about towards the end of this chapter, fairy. Do we have any info on that? I don't think we do.
I think we got some stuff. I can't remember if it was Guillerme or Marisica who said it, but there was talk of an idea that fairy were the children that were getting kidnapped and turned into
Mm,
glamour drowned.
mm,
I think the only thing I can correctly remember them saying is that they don't remember. They're not fully sure.
yeah,
Um, but
very interesting.
I do think they went to that fairy market in Arc 8, and wasn't there one of the shopkeepers talked, or was it in Shelley's thing? There was a one point a fairy talked about having a grandchild, didn't they?
Yes, that was when they were in the fairy markets
It
on the
was in the
field
fairy
trip.
market.
Yeah.
So I mean, I suppose Toadswallow and Bubblegum later on are going to talk a bit about having kids. So
Mm.
maybe there's just multiple ways for like things like goblins and fairy
Or
to
maybe,
spawn.
yeah. I mean, well, the way that they talk about having kids is obviously very much sexual reproduction, but maybe goblins consider birthing other goblins like that a kind of parentage. That
So
doesn't really track, I guess.
walking out to the rotten cabbage patch and pulling one out
Yeah,
together.
yeah. I don't know. I guess that doesn't really track with how Toady gets born, does it?
I don't know. I could see there being multiple ways of these
Yeah,
things
yeah.
being
True.
created. It's
Um,
more fun that way.
yes. So we jump back to the present, and the Kennet others are continuing to track the witch hunter. Toady is kind of watching from on top of buildings. They're staying as safe as possible, despite obviously being worn down over time.
Yeah, and eh, he's got this gum that he brings up here, which is more than just gum. Uh, I guess this is just a fun bit of foreshadowing for us learning about his paramour later on in
Mm,
the chapter.
mm. Okay, great. Yeah, sure, no comment. Uh, but yeah, so I think the meat of this chapter is Toadswallow kind of observing. Sorry, the meat of this part is Toadswallow observing Guillerme setting these people up to distract the witch hunter, and I think that's great. I feel like this
Mm,
is the first time we've seen what it looks like for Faye to be doing this overt manipulation, and we can only really see it here because this is the most blunt that we've ever seen Guillerme be. But it's delightful to see Guillerme doing things like messing with people. He shows two pictures to somebody. It's never. I don't think it's stated, but I think it's implied that one of the pictures looks like Raff, and uh,
yeah, and he
and the
calls him
guy's
a
like,
criminal.
yeah, exactly. He has psychopathic tendencies, basically, which I think is just a very blunt way, but a great way to just get somebody to pay a bit more attention to Raff to fuck with his head in a fun way.
Yeah, and I think the actual complexity, because there's a moment where Toadswallow is like, "Oh, you're just doing this," and Guillerme has this bit where he's like, "Oh, actually, I'm doing like so much, and you couldn't even comprehend it, and this is so
Mm,
crude."
mm.
Um, like one thing I really like in this chapter is how fake all the fairy actually feel.
Yeah,
Like even Guillerme's a bit like, "Oh, you just don't understand."
yeah,
But like we see later, like we understand that he's sending people at the witch hunter, and then we learn like later on, also Marisica is sending people at the witch hunter doing different things. So there is that extra layer of like the way Marisica and Guillerme are playing off of each other.
or against each other, right? Which
Sorry, yeah, yeah,
but like I wanted to make that distinction because the fact that it's not them doing extra levels of things, it's them doing one thing but also being shitty to each other as their second level. Like it's just so pointless. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like it's one of our first super concrete examples of like this top tier level puppeteering that Fairy can do, and we're just seeing them use it to kind of bring each other to very near a draw.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
why they're not achieving much.
Yeah, although I guess it's worth touching on this because Toad calls out that Raff is part of their interplay, their their sex games or whatever you want to call it. Um, but given that Lucy ruminates on the fact that Raff being here at all is somebody has set that up. I wonder if this is hinting at that being either Marcy or Guillerme. And I have more thoughts on this once we get to that part of the next chapter, the end of the next chapter. But
Okay.
it's just interesting to bring it up here because it's obviously becoming a recurring beat if it's happening here and also a few times in the next chapter.
Well, this straight up establishes a pattern of them manipulating him. So yeah.
Exactly right.
Um, I also want to call out. I love like the exchange Toadswallow and Guillerme have here. Like they actually have witty banter and seem to
Mm,
play off each other in a really cool way. Like Toadswallow is like timing his laughs to cut Guillerme off. He actually manages to successfully goad Guillerme into getting closer to the witch hunter,
mm.
which is very much like a moment of like, okay, Toadswallow is not just a regular goblin when you see him manipulating a fairy like that.
Yeah,
Um,
like Guillerme is acting like Toad's words have absolutely no effect on him, but you can tell he got under his skin here.
yeah, and he's a fairy. I suppose you could always sit back and be like, oh, but Guillerme wants him to think it's
Yeah.
working but like, I choose to believe that like Toadswallow seems to be this kind of schemer in a way that's similar to fairies, but obviously quite distinct. Like he's got this very blunt scheming. Like yeah, he just sort of directly calls out, "Well, I'm getting closer to the witch hunter than you," and then he notes that Guillerme starts getting closer to the witch hunter.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah. I thought it was pretty good. I like seeing Toad score points. It's fun. Um, so we jump back in time again. We're going back to the Warrens, and we see the moment when Turd began to become Toad.
Yes. um, I wanted to talk like a bunch in this part. If nothing else, because like I think we've talked about goblins being kind of like children in some ways a lot. And so obviously the idea of Toadswallow as a goblin who teaches children feels important.
Mm,
And I love this section in this flashback because it feels very much like that part in like a high school movie or TV show where it's like the kids who are seniors talking about what they're going to do when they finish high school and leave town. Like Dee Dee is clearly just sort of talking about going to the big city. She's going to get out of this small podunk town of the Warrens. Um, and like Toadswallow and Bubblegum are like starting to make their own plans. Like it's just really fun. I guess we track all these stages of Toadswallow growing up.
mm,
As we're sort of evaluating some bits of Goblin culture and those links to because all the stuff about Goblin culture being like toxic and everything, like goblins being children fits into that because it's like the environment we're in as children affects who we are when we grow up.
mm. I like this comment by you. I like the idea of this being the we got to get out of our small town section of a high school or whatever. Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's a great way to view these flashbacks that we're seeing because it's hard to determine Toad's age as we go through them, but um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the start of his wanting more, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah. It's where he starts to really concretely put together how he's going to get it.
Yes, true.
Um, yeah, I want to
Um,
know where this girl Dee Dee brought back ended up too. Like
yeah,
just while we're
right.
talking about where people ended up.
I love this. Dee rescuing this abused child is like heroic in the most goblin-y of ways, right? Because Dee
Yes.
is justifying it or attempting to justify it as covering her tracks, but it feels shallow. Like that feels like a shallow justification, and it's just kind of her. It reminds me of when it was America Ted's. Sorry, was it Liberty's interlude where we dove into that? I can't remember, but all that stuff about like her bonding with Alexander and we were talking about their attachments to the goblins as being these kind of like outcasts of society as they felt they were. And this feels
Mm.
like the same for me for D is like seeing this abused little girl and seeing a kind of like downtrodden and pained existence, and therefore wanting to stick up for her. I think that's just great.
Yeah, yeah, it did remind me a bit of Liberty stuff because you could tell, yeah, as you said, like Dee has all this stuff where she's like, oh, and then the dad came in and he was like punching her, and it was like, it was getting in my way, so I had to deal with it. And it's like it wasn't getting in your way,
Yeah,
like
I know,
you just wanted
100%.
to do something about it.
Yeah.
um, I wouldn't go so far as to say she has a heart of gold, but she's got a heart. You know, it
Yeah.
grew 3 sizes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Uh,
good
I
stuff.
mean, just the whole scenario is just hilarious as well
Mm.
because, like, imagine being this girl and, like, you know, there's this monster that lives under your bed and fucking sells your toys and shit and is like torturing you, and then just one night it hops in the bed with you, and you must be like, "Oh fuck, this is how I die," and then instead it just kills your abusive father. Like, what a ride!
I know, right?
And then this girl's just like, "I want to watch cartoons." I was like, "Holy shit!"
Uh, yeah.
It was a little bit hilarious, but also you're just like, "Holy fuck, this is tragic." Like, where is this girl now?
Yeah,
Is
I,
she
I
okay?
definitely want to. Where are they now on this girl? Because I mean, timeline wise, how long ago do you think we are? Like, could this be the origin story for Durocher or something? Like, I'm trying to figure out roughly how old we're meant to figure out they are.
Um, I think he mentions decades since going to the fairy courts, and that was
Oh
after
yeah,
this
that was
one.
after this, huh? So
So,
maybe dead by now is the answer.
yeah, or well, I mean, decades. Durocher could actually be
Mm.
like about the right age. I don't know.
Yeah, decades from the fairy court makes me feel like this is about 80 or 90 years.
Oh, and I was thinking more
Mm.
50-ish,
Yeah.
which actually might be too old for Durocher, but yeah. I'll
Um,
just meet like America and Liberty's grandma, and it was that.
yeah, could be. You never know.
Oh, also they mentioned frogging, and I just like Dee Dee says she was frogging with the family, which is that like,
Mm.
do you remember that story? It just like scarred me when I was like 18, and there was that story about the woman in Japan who lived in the guy's cupboard for like a year.
I don't remember that story, but it seems like it's a horror trope of like things living in the walls.
Yeah, no, there was this lady, and it was like this guy had a one-bedroom apartment, and he started to notice that his food was going missing. So he installed cameras, thinking people were breaking in, and this woman had been like living in the top of his kitchen cupboard for like a year, and she just came out and like took showers and ate food when he wasn't there.
Mm.
And he's watching this footage in the house when he finds that out. Like,
Hmm.
that's terrifying.
Yeah, you're right. That's pretty horrifying. Yeah, it's yeah, it's creepy stuff. Um, so now here's something that we need to discuss. Obviously, Bubble is a character that we see a lot in this, Toad's girlfriend. We don't actually learn their name, but we know that their name, the kind of sanitized version of their name, is Bubble Yum. You've been calling them Bubble Cum, which is the, I think,
Yeah.
commonly accepted, fandom name for them. But it could be something less gross. It could be, for example, Bubble Bum, and it's already been slightly sanitized.
Yeah, whatever you need to tell yourself to sleep at night, I suppose.
No, yeah, it seems to track to me. I like that Wildbird doesn't say it; he just lets our fucked up minds fill it in for themselves.
Yeah, well, it's the same as like I don't think we've ever had confirmation what Blunt Munch's actual name is.
Yes,
I
yes,
have
you're
a
right.
s- I have a
Yeah,
guess. I'm
we
not
can
going to
all
say
kind of
it,
guess, right? Yeah,
but yeah, exactly. Um, Gashwad would probably be another one. I'm not actually sure what Gashwad's might be.
Gashwood sounds like it could be already just what it is.
Just it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just with like the grosser interpretations of some of the parts of that name.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway.
Anywho, let's move on. So yeah, we're back in the present again. Toadie is escorting Snowdrop back to Avery, and is offering her a job as a goblin sage, which is great. Again, flashing us back to when we were hanging out with the Teds and we saw that other goblin sage. I think Snow would be a great fit for that.
I should definitely be better than the guy with the fake plastic bag beard. Um, actually, Snowdrop was the one who kept talking that guy up. Actually, right? That was like the joke at the time in the story was that Snowdrop kept being like, "Oh, he's actually super wise." Um, so it'd be kind of funny that she's gonna take on the same sort of role.
Yeah.
We get another comment on her new outfits as well from Toadswallow, because and like this is the second time in a row where when we've seen her, somebody's sort of taken note of the fact that her outfits look more put together. And one of the things that's brought up is she's got like headphones that are like opossum ears. So I'm just really excited for this development in the inevitable Snowdrop fashion line that Wildbow will release, because now we're talking like accessories as well as t-shirts.
Yeah. No, I'm keen. I want to get the Snowdrop action figure with the soggy handshake accessory.
Okay. If you want it, I mean, it's all yours. You could have
um,
mine.
yeah. Anyway, in this conversation between Toad and Snow, I do love that Toad's advice to Snowdrop is just basically carry a bunch of cool tricks with you, because that's just who Toadswallow is. He's just a goblin that carries around a bunch of goblin tricks. I mentioned the soggy boxing glove. That's his weapon form, which is effectively just a kind of Inspector Gadget style glove. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, he gives this advice to people a couple of times in this chapter. Like, it's such his thing. Like, he's got this consistent brand of like, from that first fight when he was born, he realized that he needed little tricks to win, and he's constantly trying to impart that advice on other people.
Yeah, and I mean that even in his like fantasy about the goblin markets that we'll get to, that's the role that he sees himself playing, right? Is this
Yeah.
like this jovial uncle that wanders around the markets winking and giving advice to people.
Yeah, it's why I was a little like I honestly wish that
I
we'd
kind
gotten
of like it.
Guillermo. Well, yeah, but I wish we'd gotten that Guillermo interlude,
Ah,
to follow this up, because I feel like Guillermo plays off that in a really fun way, because he's kind of been a mentor as well. And like
yes.
the thing we see in Toadswallow's head in this chapter is, he's not doing it for some selfish reason. He genuinely seems to like giving people advice
Yeah.
and helping them.
Yeah.
Like yeah. So it's like it's just a really cool part of his personality, and I want to see how that is compared or contrasted with Guillermo.
Mm. Yeah, I'm interested to see that too. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I just love Toad.
Yeah,
I trust him a lot more than I trust Guillermo, so I kind of want to see it. Like we
yeah. I
find
mean,
Toadswallow's grand plan out in this chapter, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, that's cool.
yeah. Yeah, whereas like I've kind of given up on getting a Guillermo interlude, because the next chapter focuses so much on Guillermo from Lucy's perspective. I was like, oh, this feels like we're gonna do this here instead of a Guillermo interlude. It would be weird to give him so much attention in Lucy's chapter and then follow it up with an interlude. So I was a bit like reading 10.3. I was like, oh no, the Guillermo interlude, it's disappearing right in front of my eyes.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna get we won't get a Guillermo interlude until it's revealed that he's actually one of the co-conspirators.
Yeah, true, true. I mean, he to me, I read Guillaume as the person who's probably most closely aligned with like Team Miss. Like, I'm sure he's got his own other bullshit going on. He's a fairy or whatever, but like, he seems to be the one who's leaning into what Miss set up the most.
Mm.
Anyway, so we'll get there. We'll get there.
We'll get there. Sorry.
We should talk about Toadswallow's offer to Snowdrop. Because as you sort of talked about before, it feels like it means a lot that he wants Snowdrop to be this person who is like the face of the market leadership,
Mm.
instead of like another goblin.
Mm.
Because she's got goblin aspects to her. I mean, we've talked about that a lot, but she's not a goblin. So it really sort of sets the vibe of this place as a marketplace, that it's not a goblin in charge. It's somebody who is in sync with goblins, but is also in sync with practitioners, and like has other parts of aspect to her. She's got nature, she's lost. Like,
Mm.
I really like her as a choice for selling what he wants this place to be. It's not the Warrens 2.0. It's not another goblin hub. It's something different.
Mm. Yeah, it is. I like it. And again, I mean, it's Toadswallow changing the way that the world is going to work, right? Like changing the systems.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He wants this place to be, yeah, different to other goblin places, and
Yeah.
putting someone who's like part goblin in charge of it is a really cool way to sort of make that goal clear.
Mm.
And again, better guy than Bristow, because he believes in his vision and doesn't want to be the one in charge of it. He's just trying to help set it up for everyone else.
Yeah. He's a hero. There's no doubt about it. So we jump back to the past again. We take a link to the past, and we see the Legend of Toad running around catching fairies in glass bottles. It's very Zelda, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. I saw this happening, and I was like, "Well, at least he'll be safe if he runs out of hearts."
What are you gonna imagine if we get to the point where Toad is like in a fight and almost dies, and then just takes out a fairy from a glass bottle and eats it? I would love to see it.
Oh, that'd be good.
Bo, I would love to see it. Make it happen. Yeah, there's this line. So we jump back and we're watching this fairy, and it's kind of like it starts out as a bit of a nature documentary, and then we get this line: butterfly wings didn't lend themselves to velocity, however. Which is just such a brutal line. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I always forget, but I quite like how like fairies with a Y exist in this universe. It's the same as like the brownies. Like there's just so much richness to explore. Like the idea that the fairies we picture from our childhood of like little things you could fit in a jar with butterfly wings. It's like, yeah, they exist and Toadstool's gonna fucking capture them for some bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm sure they didn't have a pleasant end. Uh yeah. And, like, again, like, we see 2 fairy in this section, and, like, much more so than Guillermo. God, these 2 read is just pathetic, like, from Toadswallow's point of view. Like, their shit comes
They
across as
are,
fucking
aren't they?
Days of Our Lives level soap opera.
God, they're terrible. Oh, it's so shit.
Yeah, the moment where the other one's like, "Oh, but spring leads to tragedy." It's like, "Wait, no, but that means," like, it's
Yeah.
just it's and Toadstool interrupting them by making vomiting sounds is just exactly what it deserved, and I really felt that from his perspective.
He
It's
literally
great.
couldn't help himself. He gives himself away because he just can't. Uh, good
It's like
stuff.
that time where you see, like, a shitty thread on Reddit or on the YouTube comment section, and you're just like, "I shouldn't get into this."
Yep. But here we go. Yeah. Yeah, and so Tony's kind of talking about how he's become he and Bubble have their lives have kind of become about the collection of power in a non-traditional goblin way. He's effectively a goblin entrepreneur, right?
Yeah, basically. There's this interesting, like, he and Bubble are trying to upset the system, though, like, obviously, he's leaning into practitioners and, like, trying to influence the next generation to be better.
Yeah.
Whereas she is like, even though she can't grow, she's using practitioners to get power over other goblins. It's interesting. It's like they're trying to transition goblin stuff to more brains over brawn.
Mm.
Uh, because usually with goblin stuff is mentioned a few times in this chapter, like size is the deciding factor for who's in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, as we were talking about before, it's this Darwinian kind of fight, uh, you know, strength hierarchy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting that Bubble and Toadstool are both leaning into the idea of using practitioners to give themselves power outside that. They're using practitioners to boost themselves.
Mm. Yeah. I wonder if it's because like Bubble and Toad are got. We don't. I don't know. Maybe we don't hear that much about goblins, so we can't really definitively say this. But they have a relationship. They have a boyfriend girlfriend, as they describe it, relationship, which isn't something that
Yeah.
we have heard that much about, right? Like, so they're
I
clearly
was
used
wondering
to
that too.
having partners, I guess. So I wonder if that helps them work with practitioners, that they're able to actually like. I mean, even if they're not the most considerate, it's hard to be in a relationship without at least having some level of empathy, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen some pretty shit
Yeah,
relationships.
true.
But no, I tend to agree. It felt like a pretty good relationship. But obviously not perfect. He talks about it being on again, off again in this section. But I came away with this vibe. Like, the way he talks and thinks about her throughout the story, it's sort of like I get the vibe that it's a relatively healthy relationship. I guess we haven't seen Bubble. Like, hopefully she hasn't turned into a piece of shit with the route she's going down of desperately seeking more power. Um, yeah, I don't know. I agree. I thought it was interesting. I wasn't sure if goblins ended up in relationships.
Mm, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not something that we've seen before, right? So who knows?
No, exactly. They just
Um,
didn't seem like the types, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly right. So we jump back to the present and we see Toady watching the Kennet Others fighting the witch hunter. He's just chit chatting with Rook and he reveals his grand plans for Kennet, and Lucy overhears.
I love how Crooked Rook and Toadswallow like sir and ma'am each other. There's this real like feigned dignity. They're both like ironically doing it or being like, "Oh, thank you, ma'am." And it's like, "Oh, no worries, sir." Um, it just adds a really fun vibe to this conversation, similarly to the one with Guillermo before.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah. It's well, I think the thing I empathize most with Toad from this chapter was this line that he drops where he says, "Ma'am, I'm so fucking curious what you're on about," which is just we can all relate. That's mood.
Yeah. Well, I think isn't that the first thing he says to Crooked Rook? Like she comes over and sort of says hi, and he's just like,
Yes.
"What are you on about?"
Way to open the
Like,
conversation.
it's
And
just
I
like,
mean, this conversation
yes,
ends with us having no idea of what Rook's on about, but with us having a strong idea of what Toad's on about. So,
yeah.
another tick on Rook's manipulation checklist.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I don't know. Again, she doesn't manipulate as much as she just
Sure.
gives him a platform to talk, and
Yes.
we like Toadswallow likes to talk. He likes to explain things. He was
Yeah.
very easy to get this out of.
He's
Um,
just so friendly.
yeah. Um, I it's one of the early things that comes up in this chapter. Oh, sorry, this conversation is Crooked Rook gives us a quick rundown on the two big sides as she sees them. There's obviously the Carmine throne takers,
Mm,
who like at this point we're assuming want to turn this into like the Carmine domain and make it a shithole or something.
mm,
Um, but she refers to John's side as like the side of John's piece. Well, Toadswallow kind of calls it that.
mm.
And that's interesting because I definitely left John's interlude with this sense of like not quite knowing what his plan was. And this feels like, okay, so he's definitely committing to trying to end that violent cycle he was trapped in. Um, we're still just left here being like, how is he planning to do that?
Yeah. Um, yeah. Who knows?
I
Yeah.
mean, like an interesting thing is when the Carmine roll, like remember, like in Arc One, when they were like, "Oh, can you kill the Carmine Beast?" and it was sort of like, "Oh, fully killing the Carmine Beast is like killing all violence in this whole third of Ontario or whatever
Mm,
it was."
mm.
And it was like, so that's not something you could do. It's like, well, maybe it's something the Carmine can do. Like, is that what is John very literally going to try and end the cycle of violence by like somehow using his role to like
Like
damp
depower violence rather than
yeah,
amplifying it.
somehow make it something that in this region becomes something that has less sway so a Carmine role isn't needed. And I mean, of
Mm.
course, it'd be extra hilarious if he's sacrificing himself to do
Yeah,
his
that's
ultimate
what I
like
was just thinking.
self-sacrifice play.
Classic
Um,
John.
so yeah, I don't know. Like that doesn't feel quite right to me as an idea of like just
Mm.
removing violence from the region because I don't understand how you would do that or maintain it.
Yeah, I mean, it could just even be as simple as like we see that things are getting more and more violent without the Carmine Beast as a way to kind of funnel that. So maybe just by being the Carmine whatever, he would be kind of making it more. I don't know. It doesn't quite track. I don't think.
Yeah, but there's still the whole palatability and
Yeah,
stuff. Like
yeah.
there's still some
There's still
trick that
something
we're
there.
missing. Yeah. Um. Another thing Crooked Rook mentions here as well is like when Toadslaw sort of suggests that he's unique as far as goblins
Mm.
go. She says he's rare rather than like fully unique.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to bring up this line because it really touches on something that I fully enjoy about this story, which is that it's not like this story hasn't even pretended to be operating on like a global scale and be more epic than everything that's going on in the world. Like this is very much yes, there's some crazy shit going on in this segment of Ontario right now, but like for all we know, there's like way more hardcore shit going on in like, you know, practitioner Russia or something. Like it's not this story isn't redefining the world and like has the whole safety of the world as its stakes. It's just this one small segment that will be at most, I think Miss in 5.d phrased it as like a precedent.
Mm.
And I just like that as like a story that kind of has defined boundaries for its stakes and is able to operate within them and still feel epic,
Yeah.
but it doesn't need to be like if we don't stop this, then the whole world is going to explode.
Mm. Yeah, it's not earth-shattering stakes, but it is important and personal.
Yeah, and it helps the world feel richer to know that like all this is going on and this is just this part of Canada. Like it's not there's so much to this world that we haven't seen, and I reckon that's cooler.
Yeah, it also lets it feel like there's other stories to be told in this world, you know? I mean, I think a great example is oh fuck, his name's Ted, uh, one of Bristow's Aware. You know, the one who lived through. Was it
Yeah,
Ted? That's right, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Ted Havens.
Ted Havens, exactly. As this character who should be the protagonist of a story, but we're not seeing that part of it, and I think that's
Yeah,
just so great.
yeah, I 100% agree. It's like that whole thing where you don't explain all the mysteries of your world. It's more fun to leave them open, and like
Yeah,
this story's doing that a whole bunch because we're only covering one small section of one country.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
focused on one fun mystery. Um, So let's get into Toad's, goblin market desires, because obviously there are some problems with it, but like one of the biggest things we've seen about Kennet and trying to make Kennet something different, one of the biggest problems we've seen is like basically everybody who learns about it, whether they're a practitioner, another, a witch hunter, has a reason to go and fuck it up, right? Like go and actively destroy it and prevent it from being a thing. Um, this is so far the only idea I've heard that's like, yes, problematic in some ways, but actually would give it like a reason to exist and to be like protected by practitioners or whoever. Like if it had a function that it was serving that was a bit more tangible, it it gives Canada a reason to be around and not just be fucked up by the first practitioner that comes their way.
Um, yeah, there's definitely that side of I mean, again, like, as Toadswallow brings up, a lot of other goblins and fairies will not like this idea, so if it's
Mm,
being sold as the 8th fairy court, I think it would cop a lot of heat. If it's just a goblin market and, like, Toadswallow eases in
yeah.
the idea that it's,
Yes, which I think
a
is
fairy court,
wise, branding wise.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. I mean, the innocence, I feel like it's the problem here to me, like,
Mm,
Toadswallow, I don't know, the way he phrased it, it gave me the vibe of it's sort of like he wanted to build it on the battlefield, which makes me think, Kennet's 5,000 citizens may not necessarily come out of this as innocents who are still okay.
yeah,
Um,
sure, but honestly, like goblins aren't great, but compared to a lot of the others that we see, they're not the worst, right?
yeah, oh yeah.
So you could do worse, you know.
You could. I mean, like, I'd pick Toadswallow's plan over, like, Edith's
Yeah,
in a heartbeat for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um, I just I think there's room to maybe try and set this up in a way that doesn't take over the town. Like
Yes, true.
hopefully the fact that Avery's going to know about this via Snowdrop. Oh no, she's just going to
Well,
know that
Lucy knows
Snowdrop's
about
being
it
set
now,
up.
so
But yeah, but Lucy knows. Like hopefully they can use that to like open a dialogue with him and negotiate.
yeah, find a way to make it tangible and realistic without being too painful for the innocents. Sure.
Especially because Rook fucking did this to try and put them at odds, clearly. And so like, I just love it if she had to eat shit on that. Because the Kettateers turned it around and were like, okay, how can we make this work in a way that works for everyone?
Mm, yeah, I'm sure there's a way.
I also just really want to give a shout out and some credit. We obviously had Jay on at the end of Arc 9 as well. And despite that being already the longest fucking episode of anything we've ever made, um, that conversation went on for about an hour after we stopped recording.
Mm,
And one of the things Jay talked about, they've actually had this theory for a while that, well, I guess not theory, they've used this framing of goblins being an 8th court in their own live read. Um, so another shout out for Jay's live read because they clocked onto this months ago. But also, I just particularly wanted to bring it up because it was one of the things they said that didn't make the episode, and um, yeah,
they
like
should
it's
get the
obviously
props for it.
yeah, like it's now like a canon set of framing.
Mm,
I actually argued against it, and I still kind of do. I think it it's right, but it's not the whole story. If that makes
mm,
sense. Like I
yeah,
think I mean, that's the great thing about this world is you can sort of frame things however you like, and they all sort of are as true as we let them be. Like if
Mm.
Toadswallow got this idea to have momentum, it would probably start to become more true that goblins were the eighth court. But I think at the moment it only captures some of the picture.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's. It feels like it's. It almost feels like it's an interpretation of a truth. You know, like it's not necessarily the solution. It's just a way you could kind of a layer you could view the solution through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it. Like, because it applies to Toadswallow and some of his friends, but it may not necessarily apply to all goblins. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, like so, and it's an idea that is worth pursuing because I think Toadswallow, from the sounds of it, he's trying to create a market that is less toxic than like the Warrens. So,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
it's an idea I'll support because the more traction we get it, the more true it becomes, the better for everyone. Um, it kind of strikes me as a nice middle ground between like where goblins are now and them being fully healthy people by modern Western standards, which isn't a goal I know they could reach, or maybe whether they should.
Mm.
There's a whole conversation. But I don't know, my own personal take on like goblins and fairy, like my lens through which I view them is sort of like, to me goblins are like representative of all the parts of humanity that we try to like leave behind or like discard or hide away. Like that's why they're associated with the ruins, like the trash heap. They're the things we try to hide away. Um
Yeah. You know, shames versus like aspirations.
Yeah, exactly. Like fairies as their sort of opposite are like the things we're reaching for. Like, you know, there's different types of fairy, obviously, but different people aspire to different things. We've got like courts that are clearly synonymous with like celebrity. We've got these monarchical royalty courts. I think that was High Spring. Um, it's like fairy are all the things we chase and we elevate and we like to pretend that we are and move towards, whereas goblins are like, we don't just walk around naked because we're wearing clothes. And so like all the gross body part stuff is big on goblins because it's the things we sort of play down about ourselves.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and like through this lens, I like if you look at Western civilization now versus like back in Victorian times, I think it's
Mm.
safe to say that we've gotten, you know, more into like gore and things like sex and much less taboo.
Yeah, just kind of more realistic about it, or like honest about it, I guess.
Yeah. And so like the idea of forming an eighth court is kind of this idea of like being somebody who's a bit more goblin-y is now something more people would aspire to than in the past.
In the
So
sense of
you could
not putting up with bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like the eighth court kind of being foundational is this idea of like, again, not representing all goblins, but yeah, this eighth court rising up as like some of these things are a bit more okay now, so they get their place alongside the fairy as like something that people move towards.
Mm.
So again, not the whole story, but some of it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean that's what I love about this world, the fact that like there's different lenses to view these things, and I think they've all got some validity. That's really cool that Jay managed to just be clever enough to, find one that would later on become canon.
Mm. Um, anything else to talk about from 10.e?
Um, nothing no, no.
Okay. Let's get into 10.3 then with Lucy. So Lucy enters the building and is just kind of chit-chatting with Guillerme about what's going on while she prepares.
Yeah, I love how this chapter really opens with Lucy reminding us she's alone right now. Like,
Mm.
because that's a big theme of this chapter is the lack of team and support that Lucy has right now. Um, and like Lucy sort of opens this up by reminding us Verona's away, Avery is concussed or whatever the fuck. So more than ever, she needs to be able to rely on the Kennet Others who she's with to have her back and help her. And that doesn't go so well.
Mm. Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll see how it goes. It's interesting. I mean, it could go worse, I suppose.
Okay, I mean, yeah. Um, most things could. I suppose the other thing as well, not just that she's missing the Kenneteers, the other thing Lucy thinks of right at the start of this chapter is she's reeling from learning Toadswallow's plans, which again, I like how she frames this as it's like it's not like a complete betrayal. Like he wasn't working against us, but he had his own motives that he wasn't being upfront with them about, and that's gonna sting a little. Like he like we talked about in Arc 9 when they were interviewing McKay, and Toadswallow was one of the ones who was instantly like, "Yep, I want to work with you guys."
Mm.
And we are like, "Oh shit, maybe that means we can trust him." It was like, no, he wants to work with them on his plan that he wasn't telling them about. Like that's kind of shitty.
It's fine.
So yeah, I would just really like Lucy's balanced response to this of being like, "Fuck, this is shitty," and I'm kind of mad, but like she's acknowledging that he's not the devil now.
Yeah, it's not a grand betrayal, which I
Yeah.
like. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Also, side note, again, Lucy is alone. Like Avery and Verona are gone. Because this story has consequences, I just want to give reiterate props to this. I always love this about Wildbow's writing. That like something like Avery getting hit in the head in a fight means that she's out of action for the next fight, which has other consequences. Like it's a
Yeah.
great way. I love how these stories don't need to have people dying or like every fight to be to the death for the to be stakes and consequences to them.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested to see what the fallout from Raff's murder, I guess, is going to
Yeah.
be. I have a feeling it's not going to go down well, right?
No, I mean, like Lucy even touches on it at the end of the chapter. She's like, he's part of a whole network of witch hunters. Like,
yeah,
this isn't just going to go away. So, like, him dying is the end of it.
yeah, yeah.
Besides the mess in Kennet, this is going to also draw attention from outside that they're going to have to work together to deal with.
Yeah. So let's talk about Guillaume, shall we? Guillaume is here, and from the get-go, he is very, very clearly, I guess, just Guillaume-ish is the word for it, right? he's really not giving any straight answers to anything, and I really love how blunt Lucy is because you really see that it annoys him, and I love that. I'm just really starting to go all in on the Guillaume is actually bad bandwagon.
What's funny is like that is where we started. I think we got like we never trusted him because he was a fairy. Then I think we got one prediction that was like Guillaume is good actually. And the more we thought about it, the more we went into it. And now it's like it's gone on long enough that you're like, but I'm gonna flip again. Like because I mean, yeah, fuck knows. Like I'm not gonna pretend I'm at all confident on which side he's on. I cling desperately to Guillaume as a goodie because I want it to be true.
No.
I'm not going to pretend it's based in logic.
I have some pretty convincing arguments that we'll get to over the course of this chapter.
Okay.
Well, I think they're convincing.
I mean, I like here because his whole thing is he feels like he's trying to teach her to fish, not give her a fish, sort of deal. That's the case he's making anyway. Like he has this whole big speech here about how all these previous fights that I've been in have prepared me for this one. Like you need to make sure you're learning lessons and bringing these forward with you as you grow. Like he's trying to explain to her in his indirect fairy way why he doesn't want to just tell her stuff. He's like,
yeah, it is fun, despite how much I think he is evil, and I can't get behind him. I cannot support him.
Well, because the interesting thing is in both of his examples that he gives to her of like comparisons to this fight, the villain is not the person who matches to Raff in the metaphor. Like, so his two examples, one is when he fought another fairy in this spider's domain, and like Raff is the spider in that one, but
yes,
the actual
not
enemy
the person
is the
being
other fairy.
fought. Yeah.
And similarly, like he talks about the Wraith and how the Wraith was laying all these social connections in the court, which again, just fucking cool little story. But like also, yeah, the Wraith wasn't the enemy in that; it was the person who made the Wraith and had it as part of their plans. Like it's in both of these stories, he's like telling her like, "Oh, this fight is just like this other fight," and it's like in both of them, Raff is not the villain that you need to be worried about, Lucy.
He's the set dressing to the larger problem.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to make that connection, and like you can just tell Gilwest probably like, "Oh God, please just see it."
Well, maybe if you just said it, Guillaume.
Oh, he couldn't do that because then he's just giving her a fish. You know?
Yeah,
and that would be you can't ever give fish; you only ever teach fishing.
Yeah.
Final Guillermo thing, because as I said, I think this is at the cost of his interlude, or the attention he gets in this chapter. He mentions how the Winter Court is littered with fairy who like focused on a single thing, like swordsmanship or whatever, because it was like once you do solve it and you sort of can, then there's nowhere to go, so you fall to winter. Um, and obviously, since Guillermo is falling to winter right now, it leads me to wonder, like, do you think there was something that Guillermo tried to solve a puzzle or become the best in the world at, and now he's like reaching that point, and that's how he'll fall to winter?
Mm, mm, yeah. I wonder. I yeah. There doesn't seem to be anything that's like when you think about Guillermo, what's his shtick? You know.
It's like mentoring is the idea that comes to my mind, just because he's sort of been doing it with Lucy and Avery. I feel like the big clue here is he had that guy who he was in love with, and he's technically here because he's mourning that guy.
Mm.
Is that something like? Is he like
He's the
the
best
best?
lover in the world.
Yeah, well, the best in the world at like feeling compassion or something that would tie into Lucy's current business. I don't know.
Mm,
I just yeah, I'm so interested to watch Gil fall to winter because I feel like that'll be the moment where he suddenly makes sense in a very tragically awesome way.
mm, mm. Yeah. I'm trying to think. You know, the metaphor of being the best in the world at something and then falling to winter from that reminds me of Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride, who's the best sword fighter in the world and is so good at sword fighting that he is bored and becomes a drunkard. And I wonder if that's what Guillaume has in store. We'll see.
Yeah, because weren't we told the Kennetys won't like him when he falls to winter? That was something that fortune teller said in Arc 8, right?
Yeah,
Have I
but
made
who
that up?
knows? No, no, definitely. But who knows what
Okay.
that means?
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Pale.txt.
mm, Uh, so yeah, Lucy sets up a barrier to stop Chloe from escaping into the wider Kennet, if it comes to that. Uh, and the girl by candlelight is not happy about it.
um, yeah, again, I love how fleshed out this rune system is. That it's actually really fun to follow Lucy as she like goes through the puzzle of like how do I draw a rune that targets Chloe.
Mm,
Um, I think we talked about this last week, but again, it's just something Pale has really excelled at compared to like other book series I've read have had entire magic systems that feel less developed than just the one in this one.
mm,
And we're still learning stuff. Like we get descriptions of the runes for the major forces, like fate and time and stuff. It's cool.
mm. Yeah,
Like
I know you love the rune puzzles.
yeah, I really do. Like I had fun. There was a Reddit thread a couple of days ago on like what the symbol for the coin might be because Lucy brings it up but doesn't actually tell us what the symbol is. So it was
Mm,
really fun sort of trying to puzzle together with people what the symbol for the coin might be.
mm. Yeah, who knows? Thoughts in the discussion thread, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have ideas, please let us know. Um, but yeah, sorry. So back to the debate, like that Edith actually brings up here, because it's worth talking about. Because I think Edith's not wrong. I mean, I think she's arguing in bad faith, and I think Lucy's more correct. But Edith's concern isn't invalid.
Mm. Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's I get that it sucks, but like I don't know. It's this is the world that we're in, right?
I mean, yeah, but like
What
it,
does
it
he what does Edith want in this situation? Like I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing, right? Is like because it does suck for her because Lucy can just go around and draw these diagrams, and it can completely fuck one of them up, and it's like takes her a minute to set up.
Mm,
Like that is, yeah. I mean, like I can understand why that pisses her off, but they're like, as you said, like every time she sort of brings it up, Lucy has good up reasons. Like it's sort of like, oh, Chloe might be uncomfortable if she gets contained, and Lucy's like, Chloe'd probably be even more uncomfortable if she got out and killed people.
mm,
And it's like I think we know enough about Chloe that I feel comfortable siding with Lucy on that one.
yeah, yeah, I think so too.
Um, so it's like, yeah, I think Lucy's more correct, but I guess Edith's Edith's core concern here is super understandable to me. That like it sucks that someone like Lucy can just walk around and very easily draw these diagrams. That that could totally ruin her life.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. That is a fair worry. And that's why being an other is so painful and dangerous. But, you know,
Yeah.
like, what what do you want, Edith? What do you want her to do?
Yeah, I think like Lucy makes a pretty good case for I'm trying to do this in the right way. And we see
Yeah.
it at the end of the chapter. She has that moment where after everyone stabs each other in the back and she almost gets got by Chloe, she's tempted to just draw a line around the whole fucking factory and just
Yeah,
lock them in
God.
there. And she like has that moment of like, no, that would be a shitty thing to do. And I was like, oh thank God. Like
Yeah.
um
It would be, but I'd love to see that kind of interrogation scene.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Like it yeah, I just I get what Ada's saying here, and it's like you can see like it's this fear and that thinking that has probably led her to do all this shit with the Carmine furs. Um,
Mm.
because it both is and isn't an irrational fear that she has.
Yeah, I mean it's a rational fear, but maybe like extrapolated to a
Yeah.
level of rationality, I guess.
Just as an aside, while we're talking about the furs, something that's been on my mind for this entire arc is I really did assume that when Verona stole the furs, like Edith and Co would like kick things up a notch because it would be like, oh shit, we've lost the furs, like we need to get them back. So I've been surprised at how the town has still felt like things are normal.
Mm.
And it's like that's the reason I actually think there's probably a good call for the prediction that somebody in Kennet hired the witch hunter. Just because like you could see Edith and Marisica being like, oh shit, we lost the furs, we need to shake the town and like see what rustles up.
Mm. Mm. Ugh. Yeah.
Because it's just like it feels like losing the furs should have been a huge deal to them, and they've
Yeah.
been remarkably good at keeping their cool.
Well, Edith slash GBC has really kind of gone off the deep end, I think, in the past few chapters. But other than
Well,
her, yes.
but how much of that is just the fact that we're seeing more of it now? Like that was stuff being kept away from the Kenneteers. We were at the Blue Heron Institute for a long time since she took charge.
Maybe, I
Like,
don't know. I feel like Edith wasn't this overtly villainous before now.
yeah, but how much again? How much of that is like just the shift in perspective on the story and the fact that since it's been confirmed from us, we're viewing it through that lens.
Mm.
Um, because we didn't see stuff like there was that time in Arc 5 where the barrier was down and she was just straight up obliterating and burning everything that came through the barrier.
Mm.
I remember we called it out. We're like, "Oh, shit, that's a bit intense, Edith. Maybe take a chill pill." And it's like she's
Mm.
been doing this stuff for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I just yeah, I'm impressed at how much they've kept their cool, and so learning that they actually hired Raff would make sense to me.
Yeah. True. As a way to kind of bust up the town a bit.
Yeah. And this is a bit of a weird point that I want to bring up here. Um, so Lucy's drawing this rune thing, and she's using the symbol for death a bunch. And so she puts on some music, and she sort of links the concept of death to the men in her life in this really tragic way. Like
Mm.
the topic of death for her brings up the like Timon, who she's like a little attracted to, and like Guillaume and John, as like guys who keep seemingly chasing death. Um, and it's just I don't know with that and like the obviously the tragedy of her father dying while she's young. It was just this moment for me where I was like, God, like Lucy associating the concept of men and manlyhood with death to a degree, like makes this tragic amount of sense because, with the exception of Booker, all of the like men in her life do have a very like messed up relationship with death.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and I guess it's just sort of important to her as somebody who is like, straight and sees herself having a husband. The fact that like her idea of masculinity and what she would potentially look for in a partner is tied into that is like, I was
Well,
really
that
glad to
or
see
her
it.
brother, I guess.
Well, that's the thing. She lists Timon here as like being associated with that death energy for manliness that she sort of has in her head, and she's like, "Yeah, that's not healthy for me. I'm going to steer away from that." And it's like, yeah, like I'm glad that like Booker is this sort of positive masculinity ideal in her life. And it's like that is definitely the direction she needs to lean into.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's a thread to track.
Yeah, just like the amount of times Timon has been mentioned, like he's gonna be back in the story, right? And so
He
like
does he's occupying a lot of space in Lucy's head, isn't he?
yeah, it's like yeah, it's interesting because like I feel like the vibe she sets up here is that yeah, she maybe is a little drawn to him, but in a way that she knows isn't good for her. And you know, with someone like we haven't seen Wallace since the two of them made out in the party in like arc 4.
Mm.
So like yeah, I don't know. That'll just be interesting to see if that sort of thread of Lucy and her knowing what she wants out of a partner is going to go somewhere.
Mm. Yeah. We'll have to keep an eye on it, I suppose. So yeah, Lucy heads back inside and starts dismantling some of the witch hunters' traps.
Yeah, and like, are we sure Raff doesn't have some sort of time manipulation ability? Because like his ability to set up these networks of
I
traps
know,
is
right?
insane.
There was that part last chapter when we were with Toadswallow where Toad was like, "Oh, this whole eastern third of Kennet
Yeah,
is just his now," and I was like, "Whoa, he's been busy."
yeah, like it's insane.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, uh, I like yeah. It's like I'm glad they managed to stop him.
yeah.
Not necessarily in how they stopped him. It was like they stopped him, and then it's like there's a whole contingent of these guys. Like
Mm.
fuck. I hope
Yeah, I
I
guess
hope Raph was their prodigy.
we don't really know how long it's been, but I don't get the sense it's been anything more than like a small handful of days, right?
I got the impression this was like the end of the same day because Toadswallow
Mm.
sort of mentions he woke up at like 5 a.m., which is where we saw him end with Alpi in her nightmare.
Mm.
And so then it was like it's been at like 2/3 of a day since then was my
Mm.
read,
Yeah,
which
true.
is just insane. Like, yeah, Kennet must be small. I couldn't even cover 2/3 of my town in a day.
Mm. Yeah, it's yeah, he's quick. He's quick with them bells and strings. Um
Also, Gilmay drops a line here where he's like, "Oh, this guy's unable to jump from windows," and I was like, "Hee, that's a good callback to that girl who got
yes, to that
bad
time when
time
he
out the
saw
window."
someone die jumping out a window. Yeah.
Funny reference.
Um so another part that's worth noting, Gilliman tells Lucy about one of the trap wires, but not the other one. Gilliman trying to get Lucy killed? Probably not, but still, sus.
I think he's just really, really big on teaching people to fish. um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really like this segment in general. Like, I came into this chapter sort of expecting a big action-packed fight against the witch hunter, but honestly, he Lucy doesn't come into contact with him at all. Like, so we spent a third of this chapter with her securing the perimeter, and then this like next third is dedicated to like her and Gilmay just sneaking around, disarming traps, and like it's a really different type of tension to what I was expecting, but it's still like I was on the edge of my seat because it's just like at any moment it feels like some trap could go off and blow their face in, you know?
Mm, yeah, I mean, 100%. Yeah, it's very, uh, yeah, very tense.
Yeah, but like, yeah, very different energy of tension because it's like her slowly sneaking through like fucking Kevin McAllister's like House of Horrors.
Mm.
Um,
yeah, that's Raph's actual origin story. yeah.
he was left home alone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and again, like I think the idea of her walking around this space it fits into so much of what she's talked about with not conceding ground and like her arenas and stuff. Like she
Mm.
establishes the perimeter here. She's like reclaiming the spaces that he's trapped, and then later on, we're obviously going to see her like she explicitly disarms one of the traps by like consuming it in her glamour to the point where she can claim the area like Alpi did a couple of chapters ago. Like
Mm.
um, it's really cool how this chapter takes a totally different direction to what I was expecting, but uses that to still lean into what we know about Lucy.
Yeah, you're right, it's very cool. This like taking over the the space in a very cool way.
Yeah, and because that's just how Lucy thinks about a lot of this stuff. So it's great to see.
Mm. Yeah. Um so here's something that's worth noting. There's there's a bit where Chloe has entered the space and is kind of like everyone's keeping an eye on her and making sure she doesn't go too crazy. Um, and there's a part where she starts losing it a bit, and then Edith is the one who tries to talk her down, right? Which
Yeah.
I think is important, right? Because surely Edith does want Chloe to attack Lucy in this situation, and that's the outcome that would have happened if Edith hadn't like done this. So, is Edith good actually?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the times where Edith has felt like a nice mum to the Kennetys.
Yeah.
Um, and we know that at least the Edith part of the Girl by Candlelight is interested in having children. I think
Mm,
that's been mentioned.
yeah.
So it could be that part won out for a sec. I mean, there's also the thing. I think Edith doesn't. She does need plausible deniability. Like if Lucy dies here, and then Verona comes back and is like, "Did you do everything you could to stop it?" And Edith's like, "Well, no, I actually kind of let it happen." She's going to get forsworn pretty damn quick, right?
Sure,
Um,
I
so,
suppose.
so she needs to be able to at least say she did what she could, and maybe this is
Mm.
just that. And she's like, I mean, obviously, another moment comes up for her to
Yes,
seemingly
almost
direct Chloe.
immediately later, Edith is kind of directing Chloe away from people with these bursts of flame, but doesn't do it to protect Lucy. So it gets undone pretty quick, but it still just stood out to me, I guess.
Yeah, so I'd be interested if, like, from Edith's perspective, there was like more of a defensibility for letting Chloe go towards Lucy that second time, where
Mm.
she'd have more of a defense she was able to put up.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. I don't know. It just felt interesting. Felt important that she was like actively de-escalating there. Um, so yeah, the net starts tightening around the witch hunter, and Chloe jumps into action, attacking Lucy and freeing Raff.
And this is sort of really the moment where, like, we've been talking this whole chapter about, like, how things aren't quite gelling, and this is, like, the
Mhm.
moment where Lucy's like, "This is a clusterfuck," because this
Yeah.
is the part where it's the opposite of teamwork, and it all hits the fan. Um, yeah, I mean, like, this whole arc has been about establishing the quote unquote teams in Kennet,
Mm.
and this is like now the chapter that's really starting to deliver on that concept because we've just gone through, yeah, 5 perspectives of people who are on different sides in this conflict. And now we're seeing that element of the town come to fruition with everyone fucking playing games and shit while this fight's going on and it's costing injuries and lives.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it really becomes chaotic, right? I mean, I,
Yeah.
I guess it's always been that. We've seen some goblins have died. We know Blunt's pretty injured. I mean, basically everyone gets pretty injured, right?
Yeah, well, like Nibble's missing half a leg.
Yeah.
Chloe,
Chloe's
I
fucked up so
yeah,
bad. Oh man.
there's a part of her still in there, luckily, so I haven't given up hope, but it's like, remember in 10.c where Chloe was having her like, "Oh, in a couple of 100 years, it's all gonna be great." It's like,
Mm,
I feel like we've added 3 or 400 years to that tally, like, um, Crooked Rook's offer is probably looking more appealing now,
yeah.
which is sad.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, it just hurts because, yeah, we've spent this whole arc exploring sides to see all of their stupid games blow up in our faces. As Lucy is kind of like one of the things that has defined this story to me and that I've really loved about it is like the fact that the Kenneteers are a really good team.
Yeah.
So it's always like this story has trained me to expect people to actually come together and work well in the end. And so just watching everyone here do the fucking opposite of that just like made my blood boil. I was like, oh, I hate you all.
It's
Get
pretty
your head
rough,
out of your
isn't it?
asses for 5 minutes.
And this bit with Chloe is just so sad. There's a moment when as Chloe is kind of like desperately trying to get at Lucy in the truck, when Lucy sees tears in Chloe's eyes, and it's
Mm.
just so heartbreaking. And then Lucy kind of gets through to her, which is brilliant. It's a very Avery move, and I loved it.
Yeah, well, it's like she comes at it from compassion first. Like she has that
Yeah.
the fight leaves her. I think that's one of the really interesting things. Is like one of the comments she makes as Chloe approaches her is just like all of her lessons with Guillermo fall away from her. Like she becomes, the term useless feels harsh, but it's like she isn't able to defend herself with all her training. She kind of falls apart a bit, and it's this moment where like I had been picturing to this point Chloe the Ghoul as like this angry beast, like a bull sort
Mm,
of thing, like angrily charging around, and then we get this look at her, and it's like no, Chloe's way more tragic than that. It's like it's not anger, it's like desperation. Like Chloe's, we saw in 10.c in her head when things like the shower turns on, she's still in there and she's reliving the worst parts of her life. Like Chloe's presumably at this point just having terrible flashbacks and is confused and hurt. And yeah, it sucks seeing her like attacking Lucy in this moment, and you can't even just write her off as a mindless beast. We know that she's in there and she's suffering as she's doing this.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's just kind of sad. I'm glad Wildbow gave us the interlude first so that we could really get into Chloe's head and really feel how terrifying and terrible this would be.
Yeah, 100%.
No. So yeah, the witch hunter emerges from the building and is escaping until Mariska, under guise of Melissa, catches him and kills him.
It was so funny because like Melissa appears on the scene and she's running, and like I was like, huh, that's impressive. I didn't know she was able to run already. That's good for Melissa. And then it turned out to be Mariska and Glamour. I was like, God fucking damn it. Like, how many times am I gonna fall for this bullshit?
Mm,
So sick of Glamour tricking me.
mm. Yeah, you got. So, okay, so this is where Lucy's ruminating around who's behind this and what's been going on, and so this is, I guess, where we'll dive into it.
Okay.
Because I think a good thing to think about whenever you think about who could be behind something is who has benefited, right? One thing Lucy calls out is the people that she suspects as not involved are the ones who get injured, which could be a good thing to take note of. But
yeah, well, sorry, we didn't touch on it, but Guillermo cops a blow and a half here.
yes,
courtesy of Edith.
Yes. So yeah, obviously that's a strike against Guillermo being behind it, unless he just wanted Lucy to think that. But anyway,
that's what they want us.
Yeah. But I specifically want to examine like Guillermo and Mariska and like where the relationships with them and the Kennetiers stand after this, right? So Guillermo was fighting with Raff and obviously had moments with Lucy to potentially get closer to her, while Marcy was kind of being held off. And then also was the one who came in and did the most monstrous stuff that Lucy couldn't even bear to watch, right? So definitely it felt to me like Guillermo was the friendly one and Mariska was the one who was committing the murder, which just feels so on the nose to me that it can't just be like, it feels like it's a ploy by potentially Guillermo, who I of course think is guilty, to like have him be in the good graces of the Kennetiers while making Mariska feel like she's a dangerous person not to be trusted. Like, it just feels so. It just has to be a trick, right? It's too much.
I mean, I'm going back to what I was saying in the very first episodes of this podcast, where I'm gonna check out of these levels of mind games with Fairy and with Wildbow, because I know that Wildbow and the other Fairy are all operating at a level way above what I can even dream to be at. So like with this stuff, I've got too obvious isn't a clue for me, because is it too obvious, or is it too obvious that it's too obvious? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, again, we can go down that rabbit hole forever, right?
Exactly.
And then we have the other culprit from this is the person who smudged the diagram.
And again, like, there's probably like 10 candidates for that one that I would feel confident putting money behind.
Yeah.
Like, Edith again feels obvious. Matthew was present in Toadswallow's version of this opening, but we didn't see him at all. So like Matthew's on the list. Crooked Rook is another obvious contender. If you like, Guillermo is actually possible if you if you want to lean in that route. Like, there's so many people this could have been.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I feel like Edith is the obvious candidate, but too obvious for it to have just been her, right?
Yeah, this is one of those ones where I'm like a little more confident in being like, no, that one's too obvious. We didn't talk about. There's a great moment where Lucy's explaining the things to Edith, and she's like, "Oh, don't worry, they can be disabled by saying my surname." And Edith just immediately goes, "Ellingson," and Lucy's like, "I haven't drawn that part yet, you fuckwit." Like, so good.
Yeah. But yeah, Good chapter. I really like this chapter. It's a great keeping things moving while also adding another level to the mystery kind of chapter.
Yeah, this chapter again, it feels like the one that's starting to take what Arc 10 has been giving to us and really using it in a way for the characters. Like Lucy is seeing what a mess this is, and she ends this chapter very much thinking like we have to do something about what just happened here. Like this is unacceptable.
Mm.
So as well as like, presumably the rest of the arc will be dealing with the cleanup of this witch hunter stuff, but like also Lucy's gonna have to start thinking about what to do. And she's gonna
Mm.
have to try and rope Avery and Verona in at some point.
Mm.
I mean, again, speaking of Verona, like what I mean, at a certain point, Wildbow's gonna have to give us more Verona content, right? Like
I mean, maybe she just never comes back to the story. Yeah.
don't say that.
Eventually, surely. But not
I'm just
yet.
wondering if there'll be some sort of like recompensal like Verona mini arc or
Yeah, Verona
something.
gets her own full arc.
Not like a whole arc, but yeah, like definitely like I feel like at least a long ass chapter.
Mm. Mm.
It's like, what's happening with her dad? What's this process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll have to see it eventually. So we'll see, I guess.
I mean, yeah, I can't wait.
But yeah, that's the end of these chapters to discuss. But it's not the end of our episode. We've got more stuff to discuss, starting with some Pale predictions. Predictions left by our community in our Pale Predictor form. Elliot, do you want to pull out your prediction first?
Sure. I've got a prediction from Gart Fohammer, who is basically dropping the prediction that they think Matthew took the Doom as a familiar.
Mm.
They cite the evidence that Avery and Snowdrop can share each other's sight, and Matt is able to do this with the Doom. Like he can see using Doom sight. And then they basically also tie into the back in the Famulus text in Arc 6. There
Mm.
was talk of proportionate practitioner familiar relationships, which are the ones that are carefully managed out of necessity, striving to strike the right balance that does not veer too far one way or the other. Which
Mm.
sounds like the situation Matthew's in. Um, so yeah, maybe like in addition to hosting the Doom, like to really solidify their connection, maybe Matthew was able to take the Doom as a familiar.
What's the end result of that, though?
I mean, it would suggest a more like it's a stronger bond between
Yeah,
Matthew and the Doom
and
than
a bond that kind of ties them together more actively in a way that means they can't just be antagonistic towards each other, I suppose.
yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't give this theory super high chances, but I
Mm.
mean, it'd be very fun if it turns out to be right. Like it's not impossible. And I mean, most of my predictions end up being wrong. So if I predict this one's wrong, its chances just went straight up.
Mm. Yeah, cool.
What about yours?
I put out a prediction from Mrs. Evil Doom, uh, whose prediction is instead of falling to winter, Gilame will transform himself into a goblin, confirming Toadswallow's eighth court theory. I I love it. I think it's probably a bit too on the nose for Wabo to actually do it, but I do just really like the idea. And we need some kind of resolution to Gillamay's fall to winter, which has been talked about so much in the story. And I'm kind of more on board with the Gillamay's secretly bad train, which is probably mutually exclusive with this, but I do just think it's a great theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it doesn't feel like we've seen the end of Toadswallow's like lens to view goblin fairy relationships. But I mean, obviously, it's gonna be very interesting to see how the Kenneteers try to interact with him now that Lucy knows.
Mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. It will be interesting, won't it? We'll have to see.
Like, because if Guillerme is still a member of Kennet and Kennet becomes this market, and Guillerme falls to winter and is like, to quote Toadswallow, the opposite of a goblin. Like, what does that mean for his role in that court?
Mm. Yes, I don't know. I don't know the answers to any of these questions. I guess we'll just kind of have to see, right? Because it's like it's the kind of things where I don't think we know firmly enough about the rules of. I mean, Toadswallow mentioned this eighth court thing, but like you mentioned, it doesn't feel like it's a hard and fast. Oh, this is the way the world works. It just feels like a interpretation, right? So who
Yeah,
knows what this would
yeah,
actually tangibly be?
yeah, exactly.
All right. So next, let's get into some answers to our discussion question. We've been running a discussion question for the past fortnight, as we do every fortnight. And let's pull out some answers. So our discussion question was, how the fuck can someone help Melissa? I honestly thought we were going to get an answer to this question by the time these chapters had come out, but we haven't. So let's dive into it.
No, it feels like the story's made progress in that regard, but it's not like,
It's not resolved, is it?
yeah, like checked off
Yeah.
sort of thing. Which, I mean, this is pale. It feels naive to think something's just going to be checked off like that, unless you're Raff, I suppose.
Mm.
He got checked off pretty hard this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so should we which answers did you like that you want to pull out?
I wanted to call out I'm easily impressed's answer,
Mm-hmm.
straight up, because basically, I'm easily impressed divided the concerns around Melissa into two aspects. You've got her physical well-being and her emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And I really like this answer just because that sort of immediately cuts to the core about what's really fun with this question, which is that like those two parts are really at odds. Like
Mm.
in terms of her physical well-being, you got to get Melissa out of here. Like the Kennet is like accelerating her descent into being the bad kind of aware
Yes.
and having problems.
Yeah.
So getting her the fuck out is physically what's good for her, but like emotionally, we really weren't in these last 2 weeks. Melissa is lonely as fuck. She needs support from people who she thinks are genuinely caring about her.
Yeah.
Um,
She needs
and
something to do. She needs a purpose, right?
well, yeah, and she needs a group. And I think like shoving her away from everyone she knows is not the way to get her into a group.
Mm.
And that's what I'm easily impressed talked about as well. And I thought this was a really good answer for just immediately highlighting to me what's like fun in the fairy sense about this whole problem. Um, and I mean, I'm still sticking by my theory from last week that having her become a witch hunter that's somehow involved in things is a good solution. So I like this because it fulfills both of I'm easily impressed things. Like we physically remove her from the situation, but add her to a group and she knows she's got the Kenneteers to fall back on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. The physical and emotional parts being in conflict, I like. I think it like the best possible thing for Melissa is if she had just forgotten about it, right? But that is just 100% not what she expresses that she wants. And so it feels kind of shitty to be like, no, but the thing that's best for you is this thing that you've complained against and clearly would hate, but it's still the best option.
I suppose something we need to really give airtime to is the idea that that just actually wasn't an option.
Mm.
Like the reason Melissa has been free falling down this slope of awareness is because she had nothing else. Like her whole life was falling apart. And so it's like as long as there was nothing else, there was just no way that she could forget. And this is basically what she kept telling us, and we just really weren't listening because she's being such an asshole about everything else. But I think it's almost unfair to say that that was an option because I don't think it was because she couldn't take it because she'd switch herself off, but then she'd be just as miserable and in such a terrible state. She probably would have slipped right back into it.
Mm. Yeah.
Like without without some other changes, I just don't think it actually was an option.
Mm. Yeah, maybe you're right. I want to pull out a response from Beleg Tal, who did a great, I guess, a lyric rewrite of the song Maria from Sound of Music. And a lot of these lyrics didn't have to be changed that much to make a lot of sense for Melissa. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I have not seen that, so I just thought this was a weird
You
poem.
haven't
So I'm
seen
really
The
glad.
Sound of Music, Elliot?
No,
I mean, it's, you don't need to, but it's surprising that you haven't.
my mum's been trying to get me to do it for years.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. It's just I'm glad you're here because I was just like, this is a weird poem that Billy Tyler sent you to us, and then you're like, this is the lyrics from the song. It's like, okay, this makes sense now.
Just a random poem about Melissa.
Yeah, and it didn't like. I was like, this doesn't offer any solutions on how to fix her. I don't understand this,
This
but
does not compute.
yeah, it didn't.
Mm.
Um, yeah. I also wanted to call out to Sarwat's answer,
Mm.
who basically sort of sees what's already happened in these last 2 weeks as a potential solution. Um, and they sort of dive into what they think needs to be done to make her okay? Like, so now that she is sort of going to just be an aware, like, how do we make her happy while she's in that? And, doing stuff like telling her she's valued, not being not being rude to her, all this stuff. But like, I think the part that I really liked from this answer was their third point, which is make sure Melissa has control of her life and has a say in things, because that's a
Mm,
huge part of what she's been missing recently. And I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I think Dancing Anatolia had a great answer as well, effectively pointing out, like, the ship has kind of sailed for Melissa in some respects, right?
Yeah,
She's
yeah,
guaranteed to have lost. She's close enough to aware that she's losing all her defenses, right? So she's, regardless of what happens, she's pretty screwed, and therefore the solution must include her learning how to defend herself against the magical world that she is now a part of. So that needs to be part of the solution. Their ergo practitioner being protected by practitioners, whatever it is, the ship has sailed on her not being a part of the world.
yeah, yeah. Which fair. I think he's probably right.
Mm.
Um, yeah. I suppose I don't know. It's just I feel like awakening her is not actually a solution that ends well for anyone, including Melissa,
Yeah,
at this stage.
yeah, I agree.
And then the last answer I quickly wanted to pull out was from Ruben307, but I don't think that's actually you, Ruben. I think it's a different Ruben.
Mm.
This one was spelt without an E. Um,
Yeah, no, this
and
wasn't me. I wish.
So the third 107th Reuben suggests sending Melissa to the witch hunter school. And I like this answer because that's what I've been saying too.
Mm.
So I finally found a Reuben who gets it.
Yeah, okay. Burn on me.
Got him.
Got me. Thank you everyone for your discussion question answers. We have a new discussion question, an interesting one. So the question is, if Kennet as a town is about redefining roles and society, where might the witch hunters fit in? I'm interested in this one because, Kennet is this place of, like, we've talked about it being a model for change that could propagate throughout the entire world. And it obviously relates to the ways that practitioners and others interact. What about Aware? What about witch hunters specifically? What's
Mhm.
their role?
Yeah, because we talked about this last week and we couldn't quite make it click. So it just feels like the perfect thing to open up to everyone else to see what their ideas are. Because they feel like they have some role to play. They're a force. They're like, they're acting as jury and executioner at the moment. So how should they fit in somewhere like Kennet going forward? I think is a really interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah. So leave your answers to that in our discussion thread, which you'll find linked in the show notes down below. But that's it for the show now, Elliot.
Well, we are going to be doing a Back to Pact after this outro. So if you've read Pact, stay tuned.
Yes.
So put down that remote. That's from TV.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, thank you for joining us, everybody. If you want to talk about these chapters we covered, or this episode, or the show in general, you can do that by diving into our discussion thread, the place where you can also leave your answers to that discussion question.
Yes, you can also follow us on Twitter. Just search Power Reflections. It's where the live reads happen. It's where you find out cool news as well, like how we just released the public-facing feed of our other show, The High Ground.
Yes. You can now catch episodes of The High Ground, which was Patreon exclusive, but it's now available for everybody. But you're 6 months behind, so there's still an incentive to go and become a patron. You can get 6 extra months of show.
Yeah, and obviously, like, we're moving on to different movies and stuff, so it's like the patrons are the ones who are actually like working off the current show to help us decide where we go next. So it's
Yes.
like, it gets you on the ground floor and helps you sort of shape the show as well as listen to it.
Yep. But having said that, it's a great show. It's consistently the one that I think I have the most fun recording because it gets very ridiculous. So check it out and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Yes. So you can find that. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this week.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's available in your podcatchers now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if you want to, we already mentioned the Patreon. If you want to get more episodes of The High Ground, you can go to the Patreon and support us at the Doof Troop level at patreon.com/Doof Media.
Yep, and don't forget to head to patreon.com/Warbo while you're there. Give him some money. Otherwise, he'll hire a witch hunter to come get you.
Yes, he will. And then have that witch hunter murdered. Anyway, should we go back to Pact?
Yes. So get out of here if you haven't read Pact.
Yep.
I mean, I suppose you can, like, legally, you
Legally,
can
we
stay,
can't come after you. Our lawyers have made it clear. Yeah.
but like you shouldn't.
Mm.
Anyway, okay. Now that the non-pacties are gone, I mean, this is really more of a back to poke to poke.
Yep. Okay.
Because yeah, I mean, we've got to talk about the fact that Dee Dee showed up for this chapter.
Yeah. I was very excited to see Dee Dee. Man, Dee Dee, so great. This is before Poke, right? Like that's what it feels
Yeah.
like to me.
She's mentioned as being adolescent,
Right.
in the flashback that she's in, which says to me that it's like, and she's only just started going above ground. So I don't know how far is between this and Poke, but it feels like, you know, this is the lead up.
Mm.
Like, obviously, she's always had a knack for getting into situations with humans.
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, I was very keen to see Dee Dee. What a fun character. And this story about her rescuing the abused child was just so heartwarming. God, Dee Dee, so great.
It was such a good cameo because it was like it fit in seamlessly. Like, I think you know, aside from people who don't know how to do comments on Reddit and stuff, like there's nothing in the text to make you be like, "Oh, this must be a character from somewhere else."
Mm.
I think she fits in really well, and it's like, you know, we talked about how this was the 100th chapter, and I think this was a bit of a present to us from Wildbow, like for Poke readers, be like, get a nice little cameo in the 100th chapter. It was really cool.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good cameo. I liked
She
it.
just, it just felt like her. I think that was what I really liked about it. Is I was like, oh, that's definitely Dee Dee. This
Yes.
idiot came back to the Warrens with a human,
With a human
just
baby.
following
It's
her for some
classic Dee
reason.
Dee. Yeah. classic Dee Dee.
I suppose while we're here in Back to Pact, like, this is some stuff we would have probably touched on a few episodes ago, but it wasn't worth it alone. Obviously, speaking of Poke, the milkmaid showed up.
Yes.
A while ago. That was a Poke thing.
Yeah.
I think it was a Word of God thing before that, but I'm
Yes.
not familiar with Word of Gods.
Yeah, it was a word of God, then showed up in Poke, and now in Pale. And next as the protagonist of Wildbow's new work.
Oh god, what's that going to be?
What's it going to be? I can't think of anything.
I'm trying to think of like a synonym for like draining, but starts with a P.
Oh, wait. It'll be also called Pale, but Pail.
Yes, got it in one.
We got there, folks. all right.
Yeah, no, that was fun because like in Poke, she just briefly comes up and it's like, this is a bit weird. Some bogeyman looking thing in the Warrens, and Dee Dee's like, I got the idea from the milk for our baby from her, and it's like that's a line that has a whole new set of context.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like,
God.
like in Poke, I read that as like she's the milkmaid. It put the word milk in Dee Dee's head.
Mm.
Now I'm more familiar with her whole shtick. I'm like, oh boy,
yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah. So, what else should we go back to Pact about? Anything else that we want to catch up on?
I mean, obviously the witch hunters. We didn't call it out, but
yes.
The lighthouse had Semenego, or however you say his name, in it. That's Andy's mate who gave him the rocket launcher.
Yes, known to be a level-headed and responsible individual doling out rocket launchers. Although, in fairness, that rocket launcher did come very much in handy.
Yeah, although in anti-fairness, Andy was going to use that rocket launcher to blow up all the practitioners in town, was his original plan.
Although he did end up using it to save the day, kind of.
And also knowing the Jacob's Bell practitioners, I'm not sure how much I want to judge Andy for that being his original plan.
Fair enough, hey.
They were kind of shitty.
Yeah, they were the worst.
But yeah, no, just a fun connection. Like, not like Raff has struck me as very different to Andy and Eva. Like, he's much more magically equipped than they were. And I wonder if that's because they were kind of tangential to the network.
Yeah, they were. They were in service in JSB. So
yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know, just a fun little connection. Again, much like
Yeah,
DD, the sort of thing that like would not have jumped out to a pale reader, but when they get to
yeah,
Pact, they're going to be like, "Oh,
yeah.
neat."
The kind of thing that we'll be excited to hear about more in Pale in Comparison.
Yes, yeah. Which, if you're not listening to it, it's so much fun. It's
Yeah,
so good.
yeah, it's good stuff. So one other thing that we should bring up, and I guess I'm
Yeah.
surprised we haven't brought this up before, but I guess it's just because we haven't done a back to pact in a while. But the whole thing with Jeremy is very interesting. I think, especially given what we know of him in Pact.
Well, so Ruben's been hyping this up, and so this whole thing is just because he's got the same first name as Jeremy Meath.
Elliot, he's the same character,
We've
undeniably.
absolutely made this joke before.
Oh,
What are you
have we?
talking
Oh,
about?
fuck.
To be fair, maybe I just made it in my live reads. Maybe we haven't made it in an episode.
Whoops. Well, that was the joke, yeah, that they've got the same name and therefore are the same character.
I regret telling you about that time traveling Tyrion fetus
It's my
theory in
favorite thing
Game
I've
of
ever
Thrones.
heard. Makes me so happy how
I
people
know.
think there might be time traveling fetus theories.
I know, but you've taken it far too close to heart. I don't like
It's an inspiration to fan theorists everywhere, I think.
it. Yeah, no, that's true. There is also a Jezza in this
Mm-hmm.
story, and he is okay. Which Jeremy? If you had to pick a Jeremy, there's
Okay.
the game.
To pick for what situation?
Just life.
I'm going to pick Meath. I'm going to pick Meath. I'm a big fan of the whole Dionysus priest kind of vibe. So, despite how depressing Meath's life was, you couldn't help but love him.
Yeah, and they're both pretty good at like being in difficult relationships.
Yeah, sure, I guess.
Oh, sorry, no, sorry. Jeremy and Verona are totally not in a relationship. What could
Yeah,
I be
how dare
thinking?
you? Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of picturing Jeremy, pale Jeremy, young Jeremy, we'll call him.
His surname is Clifford. That
Yes,
actually,
I know, that was confirmed by Wildbow. Or was Wildbow just misdirecting us for the kind of post-credit scene of Pale that we get later, where Jeremy meets a young... No, wouldn't be young, sorry, because we're in the future. It would be an old, I don't know, Duncan Behame or whatever, who's like, Jeremy, I must send you back in time. And so young Jeremy gets sent back, let's say 40 years, grows up, becomes old Jeremy from Pact, and it's one timeline. And that's how it's all going to happen.
Yeah, no, he's going to go to, well, not Jacob's Bell, but wherever, and he's going to meet Sandra,
Yeah.
and he's going to be like, "I'm going to marry that woman."
Yeah, I'm going to
even
marry
though
that
she's
woman 30 years ago.
yeah, even though she's 30 years older than me.
Yeah.
And so then Alistair will be there because Rose and Sandra were
Yep.
talking about something, and Alistair will hook him up.
Yep. Yeah, confirmed, I think.
Cool. Well, as per usual, we have no actual ending for this episode, and I guess we're just gonna have to leave it on that.
I guess.